She raised her adopted son with love. He repaid her with betrayal. 74 years young, Margaret still approached Ben's laundry with a reverence that bordered on ritual. Each shirt, each sock, folded with the same tender care she'd given them when he was a boisterous 8-year-old, as if the fabric itself held fragile memories. She'd press the creases flat, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles of time, a silent testament to a love that had known no bounds. But on one otherwise unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, her world tilted on its axis. Her doctor, a man she'd trusted implicitly for years, deftly slipped a folded note into her purse, his eyes holding a depth of concern she couldn't quite decipher. Its chilling message? Family isn't always what it seems. That very night, a cold dread snaked its way into her heart. With her ear pressed against the cool kitchen wall, she heard her only son, the boy she'd plucked from the uncertainty of foster care, nurtured and loved unconditionally, whisper words that would shatter her universe. Once the judge declares her incompetent, the house is ours. They saw a gentle lamb, forgetting that she was a lioness in disguise. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. Before we dive deeper into Margaret's astonishing transformation from perceived victim to formidable force, you absolutely have to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Seriously, stories like Margaret's aren't just tales. They're living proof that real life can twist and turn with more drama than any blockbuster thriller. You genuinely won't want to miss a single moment of what unfolds next. Dr. Paul had been Margaret's steadfast physician for over a decade, ever since her beloved George passed away, leaving a gaping void in her life. Their checkups had settled into a comfortable, almost predictable rhythm. The usual blood pressure readings, a quick chat about cholesterol, and always, a wry joke about how stubborn widows seem to possess an uncanny knack for outliving everyone. It was a familiar dance, one that usually left Margaret feeling reassured and a little lighter. But this particular visit, it felt entirely different. From the moment he walked in, a subtle shift in his demeanor prickled at her senses like a cold draft in a warm room. His gaze kept darting towards the closed examination room door, a furtive glance that spoke volumes. His voice, usually a steady, reassuring baritone, was lowered, almost conspiratorial, as he discussed her vitals. And then, as he went through the motions of checking her pulse, his fingers brushing against her wrist, she felt it. A small, folded square of paper slipped discreetly into the pocket of her coat. It was so subtle, so practiced, that anyone else might have missed it. But Margaret, with the keen observation skills honed by years of teaching and mothering, felt the tiny weight against the fabric. A knot of unease began to tighten in her stomach. She waited. She waited until the polite goodbyes were exchanged, until she was safely ensconced in the familiar embrace of her old Buick, the engine rumbling to life like a nervous heartbeat. Only then, with the car doors locked and the outside world a blurred backdrop, did she dare to retrieve the note. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the small square of paper. 7 words. Just 7 simple words, yet they struck her with the force of a physical blow. Family isn't always what it seems. The words seemed to echo in the confined space of her car, each syllable a sinister chime. Suddenly, her own heartbeat thrummed louder than the traffic outside, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She drove home on autopilot, the familiar route a blur, her mind racing through every recent interaction, every seemingly innocuous moment that now, in the harsh light of those 7 words, took on a chilling new significance. Elena, her daughter-in-law, had offered to help sort her mail. Her smile a little too wide, her questions a little too pointed about bank statements. Olivia, her granddaughter, had volunteered with an almost unsettling eagerness to update her will, citing a school project on estate planning. And Ben, her son, her Ben, had casually, almost too casually, inquired about the precise value of her beloved lakefront house, the house George had worked so hard for, the house that was her sanctuary, her legacy. For a fleeting moment, she tried to dismiss it all. Paranoia, she chided herself. You're just an old woman imagining things. But the unease persisted, a cold, creeping sensation that refused to be reasoned away. The doubt, once a tiny seed, began to sprout thorny vines that reached into every corner of her mind. It wasn't until she stepped inside the quiet solitude of her home, the scent of lavender and old books filling the air, that her rationalizations crumbled. Muffled voices, low and conspiratorial, drifted from behind the kitchen wall. They weren't just talking, they were architects of her ruin. And the subject, to her horror, was her. The old house, a Cape Cod full of quirks and character, had a peculiar acoustic feature. A ventilation shaft, nestled between the kitchen and the pantry, acted like a makeshift intercom, carrying sounds with surprising clarity. Margaret had often found it charming, a relic of a bygone era. Tonight, it became her undoing. She froze in the hallway, her grocery bag slipping from her numb fingers, fruit rolling silently across the polished wooden floor. The voices were unmistakable. Ben's voice, usually so warm and familiar, was now laced with an unsettling edge of calculation. Dr. Halper says if Mom repeats the forgetfulness story in front of the judge, we're golden. Golden? The word hung in the air, heavy with avarice. Then came Elena's brittle laugh, a sound that usually grated on Margaret's nerves, but now sent shivers down her spine. 74, widowed, adopted kid she keeps forgetting isn't blood. Classic dementia narrative, wouldn't you say? The casual cruelty of the remark, the way she dismissed Margaret's entire life, her love, her very existence, as a mere narrative, was a poison arrow straight to Margaret's heart. Not blood. The words echoed, twisting the knife. Had that always been their secret thought? Olivia, her sweet, seemingly innocent granddaughter, chimed in next, her young voice unnervingly devoid of remorse. Once she's declared unfit, we list the house, split the money, and buy that condo in Naples. Think of it, no more cold winters. Naples, the word, once a pleasant dream, now sounded like a death knell for her life as she knew it. Margaret's knees, suddenly feeling like brittle kindling, buckled beneath her. She instinctively gripped the cool edge of the kitchen counter, her knuckles white, her breath catching in her throat. She had to steady herself, had to keep the glass jars of homemade pickles and jams from rattling, had to somehow silence the earthquake rumbling inside her own chest. They were discussing her future, her fate, her very existence, with the detached indifference of vultures circling their prey, carving up the spoils before the battle had even begun. They spoke of her as if she were already gone, a mere obstacle to their lavish dreams, a problem to be solved, a piece of property to be liquidated. A wave of nausea washed over her, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated, ice-cold fury. It wasn't a hot rage, but a chilling one, like a glacier grinding forward with unstoppable force. She tiptoed, her movements surprisingly agile for a woman her age, up the creaking stairs, each step a silent prayer for strength. She locked the bedroom door behind her, the click of the latch a small, defiant act. She stared at the note, the innocent-looking square of paper that had brought her world crashing down. Dr. Paul hadn't just slipped her a piece of paper. He had handed her a lifeline, a fragile thread in a tempest. Now, the terrifying, exhilarating choice was hers: sink into the abyss they had dug for her, or find the strength to swim. To truly understand the depth of this betrayal, we have to rewind, way back, over 35 years. Margaret and her husband, George, sat in a cramped, sterile county office, the air thick with unspoken anxieties and the faint smell of stale coffee. Their hearts, however, were brimming with a quiet hope, a yearning for a child that had, until now, remained unfulfilled. A kind but weary caseworker placed a shy, small 5-year-old boy on Margaret's lap. His jeans were patched, a testament to a life already lived with too little. His eyes, though, were what truly captured her. Vast, deep oceans of uncertainty, and a lingering sadness that belied his tender years. He was a small, fragile boat, adrift in a sea of unknown. "Say hi to your new mom, Ben," the caseworker chirped, her voice a little too bright, a little too forced. Ben, his voice barely a whisper, a sound like rustling leaves, uttered, "Hi, Mom." In that instant, something profound and irreversible cracked open inside Margaret. It wasn't just a maternal instinct. It was a primal ache, a fierce, protective love that startled her with its intensity. It was the sudden, undeniable realization that this little boy, with his quiet demeanor and wary eyes, was hers. He was her son, and she would move mountains to protect him. George's contracting business was steady, reliable, but certainly not extravagant. They rented a modest Cape Cod on Maple Street, a comfortable, unassuming home where laughter and the smell of baking bread were constants. Margaret, a dedicated teacher, made the life-altering decision to quit her job, trading lesson plans for lullabies, grading papers for G-rated adventures. She poured every ounce of her boundless energy and love into raising Ben. Halloween costumes weren't bought. They were lovingly stitched together from thrift store curtains, each sequin and feather a testament to her creativity and dedication. Cupcakes for every school birthday were baked from scratch, because store-bought, she believed, was too impersonal, too dear in a different kind of currency. Summers were a symphony of sun-drenched days and joyful noise. They'd pack up the old station wagon, Ben sandwiched happily between them in the back seat, singing off-key to the radio as they drove to the lake. Those were the golden years, etched into her memory with the clarity of a perfect photograph. Picnics by the water, splashing in the cool shallows, George teaching Ben how to skip stones, Margaret reading stories under the shade of an old oak tree. Simple, beautiful moments that built the very foundation of their family. Then, at 60, George, her rock, her partner, her beloved husband, was suddenly gone, a victim of a cruel, unexpected heart attack. The world went silent for Margaret. The life insurance payout, a grim reminder of her loss, became her solemn duty. She didn't splurge. She didn't mourn extravagantly. Instead, with a quiet determination, she used every cent to pay off the mortgage on their little Cape Cod. "Ben will always have a roof over his head," she'd whispered to George's photograph, her voice thick with unshed tears. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that love was an investment without an expected return. She never kept a tally, never expected repayment, never once thought of it as a transaction. Not until tonight. Tonight, the ledger of her life was being opened, and she was horrified to see that on their side of the page, her love was listed as a debt they intended to collect. The next morning dawned gray and oppressive, mirroring the storm brewing inside Margaret. She sat at her kitchen table, a bowl of oatmeal before her, the thick, creamy consistency suddenly nauseating. She stirred it listlessly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic, a small, lonely sound in the cavernous silence of her betrayal. She couldn't stomach a single bite. Just then, Ben, ever the dutiful son, swooped into the kitchen, a picture of manufactured concern. He leaned down, placing a perfunctory kiss on her cheek, a kiss that now felt like a brand. "Morning, Mom. Did you remember your memory pills today?" he asked, his voice dripping with faux sweetness. The irony was so bitter, so metallic, it tasted like poison on her tongue. Memory pills? Oh, she remembered all right. She remembered every single word from last night. Elena, a clipboard clutched in her manicured hand, breezed past, a faint hum escaping her lips. The clipboard, Margaret noticed with a jolt, was labeled Cognitive Checklist. A shiver ran down her spine. Elena's eyes, usually sharp and assessing, now held a glint of triumph, barely concealed. It was a predatory look, one Margaret had never noticed before, or perhaps had simply chosen not to see. Olivia, ever the aspiring actress, followed closely behind, her phone held aloft, pointed squarely at Margaret. Just filming for a school project, Grandma. About elder care, she chirped, her tone sickly sweet. Margaret forced a smile, a brittle mask she pulled over her true emotions, becoming an actress in a play she never auditioned for. She nodded, played the part of the sweet, slightly foggy granny, her eyes a little too wide, her movements a little too slow. Every cell in her body, however, vibrated with a terrifying clarity. Her mind, far from foggy, was sharper than it had ever been, honed by the white-hot fire of betrayal. They want my mind so they can claim my home. The thought solidified, hard and unyielding. Over my dead, no, over their ruined body. This wasn't just about her house anymore. It was about her dignity, her legacy, her very right to exist on her own terms. The battle lines were drawn. The decision to call Dr. Paul wasn't made lightly. His private number, scribbled on a worn piece of paper, had been tucked away in her desk drawer for years, a relic from a time he'd given it to her for emergencies only. This, she realized with a chilling certainty, was precisely that. Her fingers trembled as she dialed, the rotary phone feeling ancient and heavy in her hand. His calm, steady voice on the other end was a balm to her frayed nerves. They arranged to meet at a quiet riverside cafe, a place where hushed conversations wouldn't draw unwanted attention. The cafe buzzed with the gentle murmur of morning patrons, the clinking of ceramic cups, and the aroma of fresh coffee. Dr. Paul was already there, a thin folder resting discreetly beside his untouched cup. He looked older, perhaps, but his eyes, kind and unwavering, held the same deep empathy she remembered. He listened patiently as Margaret, her voice occasionally cracking with emotion, recounted the chilling details of the overheard conversation. The memory pills, the cognitive checklist, Olivia's camera. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, just listened, his expression a careful blend of concern and quiet resolve. Then, with a gentle nod, he opened the folder. Inside lay a notarized letter, crisp and official, stating unequivocally that Margaret Halverson was of sound mind and body. "I had this prepared after your last visit, Margaret," he explained softly. Something about the way Ben was hovering, the questions he asked. It didn't sit right. He then produced a flash drive, a tiny device that held immense power. "And this," he continued, "contains a video. You, reciting today's date, recent headlines, the names of every president since Truman, even a few complex mathematical equations, all recorded yesterday." Margaret stared at the evidence, a wave of profound gratitude washing over her. He had seen it, truly seen it, before she even realized what was happening. Dr. Paul took a slow sip of his black coffee, his gaze meeting hers. Judges, Margaret. They respect physicians' opinions, especially when notarized. But families can muddy the waters with emotion and fabricated stories. You need a shark, Margaret, a lawyer who isn't afraid to bite, and you need one today. Margaret, still reeling from the sheer depth of his forethought, found herself asking, almost without thinking, "Why, Paul? Why would you risk your license for me?" He shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but his eyes held a steeliness she hadn't seen before. "You're my patient, Margaret, and that, in my book, makes you my responsibility." Simple words, yet they landed on her chest like a heavy protective armor, bolstering her resolve, igniting a spark of fighting spirit she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. Dr. Paul's advice was clear. Get a shark. And Margaret, with a newfound clarity born of betrayal, knew exactly what he meant. She needed someone who could navigate the murky waters of family law, someone who wouldn't flinch from a fight. Enter Teresa Luna, estate attorney extraordinaire. She was a force of nature in tailored suits, her 4-inch heels sharp enough, Margaret mused, to puncture the most inflated of egos. Her office, sleek and modern, felt a world away from Margaret's cozy Cape Cod, yet Teresa's no-nonsense demeanor immediately put Margaret at ease. Teresa listened, her expression unreadable as Margaret recounted the entire sordid tale. As Margaret spoke, Teresa's lacquered nails tapped a rhythmic, almost predatory beat on the polished conference table. When Margaret finally finished, Teresa leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Margaret. "All right, Margaret," she said, her voice a low, confident purr. "Here's what we do. We move your assets into an irrevocable trust, immediately. Think of it as a legal fortress, a dragon-guarded vault where your treasures are safe. That lake house, your stocks, even your grandmother's wedding ring, everything goes into that trust. And then," she paused, a slight, knowing smile playing on her lips, "we record every single interaction you have with them. Every visit, every phone call, every helpful suggestion." Within a week, guided by Teresa's expert hand, Margaret meticulously transferred everything she owned into the newly established Margaret E. Halverson Living Trust, with Teresa herself as the trustee. The lake house, a lifetime of memories, was now legally untouchable. The stocks, her nest egg for old age, secured. It was a strategic retreat, a calculated move that stripped her children of their coveted prize before they even knew the game had truly begun. But the plan didn't stop there. Tiny security cameras, cleverly disguised as innocuous smoke detectors, were installed discreetly throughout her home. They were almost invisible, silent sentinels capturing every whisper, every forced smile, every veiled threat. Margaret, meanwhile, continued her Oscar-worthy performance. She smiled sweetly, her eyes a little vacant, occasionally forgetting names, accidentally calling Elena Emily with a charming, apologetic flutter of her hand. Ben, emboldened by what he perceived as his mother's accelerating decline, grew bolder still. He started coaxing her to sign a new power of attorney form. "Just in case, Mom, for your safety." He'd present the papers with a practiced sigh of concern. Margaret, her heart a drumbeat of defiance, would pick up the pen, her hand shaking just enough to make her signature a series of looping, illegible scrawls that resembled a seismograph during an earthquake. And then, as if by pure instinct, she'd wink, ever so subtly, at the hidden lens of the smoke detector, a silent promise to herself that the truth would eventually come to light. The net was tightening, but it wasn't around Margaret. It was around them. The stage was set, the players in position. The trap was baited not with cheese, but with the appearance of confusion. Elena, ever the orchestrator, scheduled a neurology consult with Dr. Halper, a man Ben had casually mentioned was a golfing buddy. The choice of doctor was no accident. Margaret arrived at the clinic a vision of carefully crafted disarray. Her shoes were mismatched, one sensible loafer, the other a slightly scuffed slipper. Her purse, an old oversized tote, was stuffed to bursting with plastic grocery bags. She looked to all outward appearances, exactly as they wanted her to look, utterly incapable. Inside the sterile, humming silence of the MRI room, as the technician prepped her for the scan, Margaret leaned in, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "I'm sober as a judge, dear," she murmured, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "And I'm recording every single word." The technician, a young woman with kind eyes, looked utterly bewildered, offering a hesitant nod. Margaret simply smiled, a secret triumph playing on her lips. She kept her performance Oscar-worthy, a masterclass in feigned frailty. Dr. Halper, a man whose golf swing was apparently more polished than his medical ethics, delivered his scripted verdict with a practiced air of solemnity. "Early-stage dementia," he announced, his voice grave, his gaze carefully avoiding Margaret's. "Recommendation for legal guardianship." He handed Ben a sealed envelope, thick with official-looking papers. Ben's face couldn't hide the triumphant smirk that spread across it. It looked to Margaret like a crack in old pavement, ugly, insidious, and destined to spread. He thought he had won. Oh, how delightful it would be to watch that smug grin shatter. One gray, blustery morning, the kind that whispers of impending storms, a process server rang Margaret's doorbell. Margaret, continuing her meticulously crafted performance, accepted the petition with hands that trembled just enough to be convincing, her eyes wide with a carefully feigned fear, like a deer caught in headlights. Ben was right there, a hand on her shoulder, a patronizing pat designed to convey sympathy. "It's for your safety, Mom," he murmured, his voice a smooth, practiced balm. "Just looking out for you." After he left, the silence in the house felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken accusations. Margaret waited a beat, then another, until she was certain he was truly gone. Only then did she open the envelope, her feigned frailty vanishing like smoke. The papers within laid out a litany of fabricated transgressions. Margaret wandering the neighborhood at night, forgetting to turn off the stove, and most ludicrously, mistaking Olivia for a burglar. Each accusation, designed to paint her as utterly incompetent, was accompanied by a blurry, grainy photograph. Clever edits, Teresa had warned her, but enough to plant seeds of doubt. A slow, simmering rage began to build inside Margaret, but she pushed it down, replacing it with a steely resolve. She picked up the phone and dialed Teresa. She read out the accusations one by one, her voice steady. On the other end of the line, Teresa Luna's laughter, sharp and triumphant, cut through the tension. "They just handed us the rope, Margaret," she declared, her voice brimming with anticipation. "They've given us exactly what we need. See you Friday." The game was on. The final act was about to begin. Friday arrived, crisp and cold, a day pregnant with expectation. The courtroom hummed with a low, nervous energy. Ben, Elena, and Olivia sat together, a united front, all dressed in matching black suits. A morbid ensemble that Margaret privately noted made them look as if they were already mourning her mind. Their lawyer strode confidently to the podium, presenting Dr. Halper's fabricated report with an air of absolute authority. Margaret sat quietly beside Teresa, her expression a carefully maintained mask of bewildered confusion, playing the part of the sweet, confused old woman to perfection. When it was Teresa's turn, she approached the judge's bench with a quiet confidence. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and resonant, "we simply request one thing. We ask to present video evidence that we believe will shed a crucial light on the true nature of this guardianship petition." A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge, a stoic woman with a reputation for fairness, nodded her assent. The projector flickered to life, casting a stark, revealing glow on the courtroom wall. The first clip appeared, grainy but undeniably clear. It showed Ben, his face contorted in a smug smirk, coaching Olivia. "Hide Grandma's car keys, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice oozing false concern. "Then we can call the police and report her lost. It'll look great for the judge." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The next clip showed Elena, her voice unmistakable on the phone, practically preening. "The Naples condo, darling. Absolutely divine. Once we get this house, oh, it's going to be glorious." More gasps, louder this time, punctuated by murmurs of disbelief. And then, the final, devastating blow. The screen showed Dr. Halper, not in a sterile office, but on a sun-drenched golf course, accepting a thick, discreetly folded envelope from Ben. The label, clearly visible, read, "Consultation fee." The implication hung heavy in the air, a stench of corruption and deceit. The courtroom erupted. The judge, her face a mask of furious indignation, brought her gavel down with such force that the sound echoed through the room like a starter's pistol, signaling the end of the charade. "Guardianship petition," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "Denied. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate investigation into charges of fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy." The game was over. Margaret had won. The gavel's final, resounding clang sliced through the stunned silence of the courtroom, shattering the carefully constructed facade of Ben, Elena, and Olivia's world. Ben tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from toxic water, gasping for anything that might salvage his ruined reputation. But no words came. Elena, her face a mask of pure fury and fear, grabbed Olivia's arm with a vice-like grip and bolted for the hallway, their matching black suits now a symbol of their ignominious defeat. Reporters, tipped off by Teresa Luna, flooded the corridor the moment the courtroom doors swung open. Cameras flashed like angry strobe lights, capturing every ounce of Ben's humiliation, Elena's panicked flight, and Olivia's tear-streaked face. The headlines the next morning screamed the truth, emblazoned in bold, unforgiving type. Adopted son plots against beloved mother. The story, a potent brew of betrayal and cunning, spread like wildfire. By noon, Ben's employer placed him on administrative leave, an immediate blow to his career. Elena's meticulously curated real estate listings vanished from her agency's website, her professional life dissolving into thin air. Olivia, once a social media darling, deleted all her accounts after her classmates spammed her with a relentless barrage of elder abuser memes. Their carefully constructed lives, built on a foundation of greed and deceit, crumbled around them. Margaret, meanwhile, returned to the quiet sanctuary of her Maple Street home. She settled into her beloved porch swing, the familiar creak a comforting rhythm. She poured herself a cup of tea, a delicate blend of chamomile and mint, and added a generous spoonful of honey. It was, she realized, tea sweetened with justice. And oh, what a sublime taste it was. It tasted like honey and closure, a sweet, satisfying balm to a wound that had, for a time, threatened to consume her. The weight of the world, it seemed, had finally lifted. Weeks later, the autumn leaves a riot of fiery reds and golds. Dr. Paul stopped by for coffee. He sat across from Margaret in her sun-drenched living room, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint scent of wood smoke from her fireplace. "So, Margaret," he began softly, his kind eyes searching hers, "how do you feel now?" Margaret considered his question carefully, stirring her coffee, her gaze drifting to the mantelpiece. There, nestled amongst cherished photographs, was the note, now carefully framed. Family isn't always what it seems. It was a constant, gentle reminder that warnings sometimes wear the cloak of kindness. "Betrayal," she finally said, her voice thoughtful. "It sliced me open, Paul. It truly did. But it turns out," she added, a faint, resilient smile gracing her lips, "I'm stitched with steel." The experience, though harrowing, had forged a new path for Margaret. She donated George's beloved tools to the high school shop class, knowing he would have approved. She established scholarships in Ben's birth name, a quiet act of grace, a way to honor the boy he once was, before greed consumed him. And she set up a foundation dedicated to supporting foster children aging out of care, ensuring they wouldn't face the same uncertainties Ben had. She never heard from Ben again. And in a strange, quiet way, some absences truly do feel like blessings. Her life, far from ending, had found a new, powerful purpose. Her story wasn't one of an old woman defeated, but of a fierce matriarch who, when pushed to the brink, became a lighthouse, proving that power can shine brightest in the deepest fog of betrayal. If Margaret's incredible fight for justice lit a fire in your own spirit, then do yourself a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and please, drop a comment below. What would you have done in her shoes? Share this video with anyone who needs undeniable proof that age doesn't erase power, that wisdom often comes with wrinkles, and that love, when weaponized by betrayal, cuts both ways. Stay tuned, because next week, we've got another astonishing story for you. A grandmother who outsmarted a charming con artist boyfriend and kept every penny of her life savings. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.